Hi, I'm back to doing my daily, well, it's not daily videos, but I'm trying to do as many videos as I can to keep my YouTube channel going, because I want to expand it and stuff, and I said before that I want to build it up. So I'm going to do different subjects all the time. So today's subject is quite, I don't know what it is, but I love researching in bite-sized pieces, and I love learning about real people and the situations that we've been in and stuff. And I've just been reading a piece, and this was from the 19th century, and this is regarding the asylums and the reasons that people were put in there. And I was looking at some of these asylums, and they are absolutely frightening, absolutely terrifying. The huge imposing buildings that sometimes could house like 1,000 people. And, they could house like 1,000 people, and they were full of people who were just like me and you. And I thought, I've looked into this before but never really thought about it, and I thought how much has society changed now, because we've got free range asylums all out on the streets now. If you look at how we live now and how people are in general now, and then look back to them days, it is a massive, massive difference. So we've now got people going around saying I've changed my sex, so accept it, deal with it, and then we've got to all go, oh well done, and clap them and stuff. Each to their own. I'm not getting into it, but that was something that would have got you locked up straight off. If you tried that in the 19th century and said, oh, I'm a man but I'm in a woman's body, you'd have been straight in there. Mood swings, straight in. Depression, in. Postnatal depression, in. Autism, I don't even know if it existed then, because I believe that comes down from all the jags that we get when we're children and stuff. I don't even know if autism was a thing, and ADHD, or whether it was just not recognised and noticed back then. But regardless, you would have been in there. Physical disability, mental disability, in there. And then I think, how many people didn't go in, and what did they have to do to stay out of it? Can you imagine? So can you imagine, right, if in today's society we had these massive buildings opened again for people who were seen to be weak-minded, feeble-minded, physically feeble. Can you imagine what would happen to us? And then I always put myself in other people's places and think, what was it like for them people? Imagine you're feeling depressed in the 19th century, but you know that if you say something, you're going straight in there, and chances are you might not come out. So you would have had to have tried to hide that. And how difficult is that? Is there a certain point you just explode or implode, and then you get noticed and off you go? But another thing that I find quite sad is that men were allowed, without any question, to have their wives admitted to an asylum because they deemed them to be hard work. How many women like me existed back then but got crushed down into little shadows of who they should have been? And I find that really sad, because what they're saying is women weren't allowed to express themselves back then, and they weren't allowed to have an opinion, and you weren't allowed to speak up. And it was the same for men, but in a different way, because the man would have been seen as being more of the head of the household, and it was more a patriarchal society back then. But if they went against the government, they'd have been in, especially if they were poor. And so when you think about how we've treated each other over the years, over the centuries, how society changes constantly, and what is considered normal today was considered an atrocity back then. I mean, they would say that you was shameful to the society if you had any of these conditions back then. You wasn't allowed to have a mental illness or anything, because you was just not right. You shouldn't have even been here. babies born with physical disabilities taken straight from the parents and put in orphanages and stuff. Oh, no one wants them, you know. And now, look at the difference that we've got. But in some ways, we've gone the complete opposite to those days, where it's a case of we have diluted down the male and female now, and we don't even know who we are. You know, I find it quite daunting in a way, because somebody could come up to me now and look like a man, and they could actually have been a woman, and they don't even have to tell me. They don't have to say it. You'd find out, obviously, but it's that I just don't know. You look at people and you think sometimes, I can't engage with you, there's something not right. But I'm the oddball because I'm not part of modern society. I don't fit in with the norm. So people like me, new, who think outside the box, would have been in an asylum. And that is actually really scary. Can you imagine? And then when I was looking at these, like dementia, I mean things like that, they didn't have nursing homes back then, so you'd have gone in for stuff like that. But behavioural issues, violent outbursts, self-harm, inability to care for oneself, social withdrawal, that's nearly everyone I know. The amount of people who I know have had it with society, they've just had enough. You'd have been put in an asylum because you don't like people, for a good reason. Social factors, family conflicts or stress. So in other words, you've stood up to your husband who's a brute, and he said, I'm getting rid of you now, because that's what they could do, and then they could trade you for another woman then, somebody who was compliant. Grief or loss. Go back to the 19th century. How many infants didn't even make it to childhood, adulthood? So you was in a constant state of grief. So off you go, innit? Can you imagine that? So during those times, you was walking around with a big cloud over the top of your head all the time, and you must have had to have thought, every single thing that I say, every way that I act, how I walk, how I interact with people, I've got to be so careful, because otherwise somebody could say that I'm crazy and I don't fit in, and I'm a rebel or whatever. And can you imagine the stress of that? Do you know, I feel really lucky at the moment that I'm allowed to even talk like this. Can you imagine 19th century, a woman like me sitting there going, you know, talking, having an opinion and speaking up and saying this government's not your friend and things like that, and the doctors are not on your side? You'd have been straight in there, and then you'd have been medicated. And they didn't just medicate them, they did torturous things to people, like they did the lobotomy, where they'd put like a was it like a stake type thing through the eye and knock it in? Oh my gosh. And it just render you just, you couldn't even function properly, you know. And then the other one was that treatment, the electric shock treatment that they gave people. But there were other things that they did to them as well. And basically, what these asylums were back in the day was literally a torture chamber and an experimental place. And it reminds me of animals in a testing centre, where they put all those poor little creatures in cages and they experiment on them. Well, back in them days, they did it with us. They did it with the people. And there's no wonder that these places that have been abandoned now are used for films, for like horror films and stuff, because the amount of energy that were gathered in there, it's like a harvesting centre. And can you imagine the fear that you felt, and the anger and the frustration and the injustice that you was in there because you had a different opinion, or you stood out for a different reason? I just feel really lucky that we're not in that position now, but it is scary. And even in my childhood, in my family, we had, like I said, my grand's relative, I can't remember how she was related, but she had a little girl who was 2 years old, and she'd just had a child, and the little girl was called Adele. and the ice cream van came outside the house, and she gave her a shilling or whatever it was to go and get her cornet. She went to get one from the ice cream van, and she was stood in the window holding the baby. And when the little girl bought the ice cream, she went round the back of the ice cream van, and she was stood eating the ice cream, and the guy didn't know, he didn't see her, and he reversed and he killed her. And this is a story we got told in our family, she dropped the baby on the couch and became hysterical and just lost it. And she ended up in an asylum. She was there for years, and it was grief. She was just grief, you know. But she was put up there and medicated heavily, and I never saw her. I don't know if I think she did get out after a few years or something, but those were the times when the answer to everything was throw somebody in an asylum, well, they were called mental hospitals back then in her day, and the stigma that came with that was unbelievable. So people would try to pretend there wasn't, which then made you act even more strange. So there was a lot of like strange people hanging about, and you couldn't quite put your finger on what was not right about them, but they were trying not to go there, so they were trying to comply. But we've all built different, and we've all got our own quirks and personalities, and try to put everybody into one little box and say you've all got to behave this way and think like that. Some of people will literally malfunction doing it. I mean, if you look at places like North Korea right now, I mean, my gosh, if you look into that, it's absolutely terrifying. You're not allowed to stand up and say no. You've got to do as the government says, and if you don't, you get punished, killed, or you go missing, you know, and it's shocking. And they don't just punish you. If you're a rebel, they punish generations of you. So that's why families hold themselves together and try and stop each other from rebelling and acting out, because if one person acts out, they all get it as well, and then the next generation get it as well. So it's a massive punishment that frightens people on such a deep level that they're just shadows of themselves. It's really, really sad. And you think, what are we actually here for? And I know there's spiritually there are different views about this, but I do believe that it's the archons that rule this world. And I know it sounds crazy. Some people would say demons because they were cast out of heaven, but they're certainly not positives, and they are not what I would call human, because humans to me have compassion and empathy, and anybody that wants to squash somebody down into what they believe they should be whilst doing whatever they want, to me is not a human. I don't see them that way. So the world that we are in right now, we are lucky. We're lucky that we can walk down the street with pink hair and declare that we're this, that and other, and we've got 15 pronouns, and we're lucky that we can do these things, and there's no comeback. There's just no comeback at all. You can express yourself, you can talk openly about your mental illness, your physical disability, without, there might be some people come back at you and belittle you, but you can literally be yourself at this time for the most part. But imagine if they bring those things back, like they were talking about doing it during the thing that I was on about, of bringing FEMA camps, and can you imagine that? You all get put in there because you're causing too much trouble, and you wouldn't do as you was told, and you didn't conform, so you're going to have to stay here now, and whoever's looking after that place will not be your people. That's why they bring people in from other countries, because they're going to be the ones who are governing all these things when they do them, if they do them. Not our lads. They wouldn't get your soldiers to come and govern you. They send them abroad and bring their boys over here, so they're governing each other, and that's why they've got no compassion and empathy, because it's not their people. So some people are saying we're on the brink of going back to these days, and it's scary because we need to fight back. And the only reason that these times happened back then is because enough people complied and said, yeah, we agree, they should be there. And they helped each other go there and stay there, because they were too scared to stand up. And you need a mass awakening to say we need to go back to having morals in this country, where we've got back to family values and things like this, and respecting the elderly and the disabled and looking after them, instead of mistreating them and neglecting them. But it is really sad. I'm just reading through it again. It's just really sad that it says many mental health diagnoses were often vague and based on subjective assessments, leading to potential misdiagnosis and inappropriate admissions to asylums. Isn't it funny how the super rich don't end up there, and they don't end up in our prisons now? It's always the poor, and it's always, you know, the people that are deemed to be the most misfits and stuff like that. And some people you look at and think, yeah, you should be in there because you are a menace to society. But a lot of people back then were just a menace to themselves, not to other people, which meant they were only hurting them. And it's quite sad to say, well, imagine what life was like then anyway. The poverty, the way people lived, the sanitation, the food. They were all hungry, the working class. They were overworked, underpaid, they were overcrowded. It was miserable anyway. And if we were transported now to then and made to live like that now, we would all have a mental illness, because we'd all become depressed and angry and would fight back. So I'm just thinking to myself, I am so lucky right now. I really am really lucky that I can have an opinion and speak my truth and say what I want without worrying about that. But can you imagine? Anyway, I'm going to go. I'm just waffling on loads of subjects, like I said, to try and build it up. Another thing that I'm going to do when I upload this video is I'm going to transcribe it into another language, but you can only do it to one other language on YouTube at the moment, on the studio. I have got so much to learn here. It's getting really exciting because I'm learning how to do stuff. But I will go for now, and I will see you later.